When we look back at the Roman Empire, we often see a map of roads, monuments, and legions. But if you want to understand the psychological toll of that power, there is no better guide than the historian Tacitus. He wrote two works that are often studied together because they offer two sides of the same coin, the Agricola and the Germany. One is a deeply personal tribute to a man he loved, and the other is a clinical, almost anthropological study of the people living on the edge of the known world. Together, they form a powerful critique of what happens to a society when it trades its virtue for security and its freedom for an empire. The story begins not with a battle or a political decree, but with a eulogy. In the Agricola, Tacitus is writing about his father-in-law, Gnaeus Julius Agricola. But before he even gets to the man, Tacitus does something unusual. He spends a significant amount of time talking about himself in the Roman Senate. He describes his own rise through the political ranks, serving as a quaestor and a praetor, and eventually reaching the consulship. On paper, Tacitus was a success. But in his own mind, he was part of a collective failure. He describes the reign of the Emperor Domitian as a time of suffocating fear. Domitian was paranoid and erratic, turning the Roman state into a surveillance machine. Tacitus doesn't just blame the emperor, though. He points a finger at the Senate. He describes a body of men who had once been the leaders of the free world, now reduced to trembling accomplices. He admits that the Senate helped drag innocent men to their deaths, essentially polishing the blade that Domitian used to purge his enemies. This creates a heavy, somber mood. Tacitus is writing from a place of guilt, and he is searching for a model of how a good man can survive in a world gone mad. That model is Agricola. Tacitus presents his father-in-law as the absolute antithesis of the corruption surrounding him. Agricola wasn't a man of extreme wealth or loud ambition. He was characterized by a quiet, steady virtue and a gracious way of dealing with people. He didn't try to outshine the emperor, which was the only way to survive under Domitian, but he also didn't sacrifice his integrity. The core of Agricola's career was his time as the governor of Britain. This is where the action of the book really takes shape. Agricola wasn't just a general, he was a builder. He understood that you can't hold a territory by the sword alone. While he led campaigns to push the Roman frontier further north, he spent just as much energy on what we would now call cultural integration. He encouraged the Britons to build forums, to adopt the Latin language, and to embrace Roman dress and education. To a casual observer, this looks like a benevolent, civilizing mission. But Tacitus gives us a hint of something darker. He notes that the Britons began to view these Roman luxuries as a form of slavery. By making the conquered people want to be Roman, Agricola was effectively erasing their independence. This is one of the most striking insights in the book. Tacitus is showing us that the most effective way to conquer a people isn't to kill them, but to make them love the things that make them dependent on the conqueror. As Agricola's success grew, so did the suspicion of Emperor Domitian. In the Roman world of that era, being too successful in a province was a dangerous thing. It made the emperor wonder if you were building a power base to launch a coup. Domitian began to squeeze Agricola, using imperial agents to pressure him. Eventually, the emperor forced Agricola to accept a proconsulship he didn't want, simply to pull him away from his army and his influence in Britain. The ending of Agricola's story is not a dramatic clash or a trial. It is a quiet exit. Agricola died in his 56th year. Tacitus describes this death as a timely escape. He means this literally. Shortly after Agricola passed away, Domitian entered his most violent and chaotic phase, launching purges that wiped out many of the same men who had served alongside Agricola. By dying when he did, Agricola avoided the humiliation of a public execution or the agony of a forced suicide. He died with his dignity intact, leaving behind a legacy of service rather than a record of betrayal. Once the personal story of Agricola is told, Tacitus shifts gears entirely. He moves from the life of one man to the broader study of a people in his other work, the Germany. If the Agricola is a study of Roman decay, the Germany is a study of raw, uncorrupted strength. Tacitus describes the Germanic tribes not as a single nation, but as a collection of fierce, independent peoples. He details their customs, their social structures, and their approach to war. He describes them as physically imposing, brave, and deeply committed to their kinship ties. He talks about their lack of cities and their disdain for the kind of luxury that had softened the Romans. The most important thing to realize about the Germany is that Tacitus isn't just writing a travel guide. He is using the Germans as a mirror to show Rome what it has lost. He contrasts the savage but free nature of the Germans with the civilized but corrupt nature of the Romans. He admires the Germans' courage and their refusal to be bought or intimidated. To Tacitus, the Germans represent a primal virtue that Rome had traded away in exchange for marble palaces and imperial bureaucracy. When you put these two works together, a clear theme emerges: the paradox of empire. In the Agricola, we see the internal rot of the Roman political soul. The Senate has become a puppet, and the emperor has become a monster. In the Germany, we see the external world that Rome is trying to tame. And Tacitus suggests that the very things Rome considers savage are actually the things that make the Germans stronger and more honest than the Romans. This leads to the Romanization paradox. Tacitus observes that as the Britons and the Germans are brought into the Roman fold, they lose their spirit. They trade their freedom for the comfort of Roman baths and the prestige of the Latin language. But the tragedy is that the Romans themselves have already lost that spirit. The empire is expanding its borders, but its heart is shrinking. Tacitus also spends a lot of time reflecting on the burden of complicity. He doesn't let the Senate off the hook. He argues that tyranny is not just the work of one bad man like Domitian, but the result of a system where good men are too afraid to speak. The silence of the Senate was the fuel that fed the emperor's fire. This is why he holds Agricola up as such a vital example. Agricola found a way to serve the state without becoming a tool of the tyrant. He managed to be useful to Rome without losing his soul to the emperor. The final philosophical point Tacitus makes is about the nature of legacy. In the Roman world, legacy was usually measured in monuments, arches, and inscriptions in stone. But Tacitus argues that these things are meaningless if the man who built them was a coward or a criminal. He positions Agricola's legacy not in the roads he built in Britain, but in the imitation of his virtues. He suggests that true immortality is achieved when other people look at your life and find a blueprint for how to live with integrity in a corrupt world. So, the overall arc of these works takes us from the claustrophobic halls of the Roman Senate, through the rainy forests of Britain and into the wild lands of Germany. It is a journey that starts with a feeling of failure and ends with a search for hope. Tacitus shows us that while we cannot always stop the rise of a tyrant or the decay of an institution, we can still choose how we respond to it. He leaves us with a haunting image of the Roman Empire at its peak. It is a superpower that can conquer the known world, but it is also a society where the most virtuous man is the one who dies just in time to avoid being murdered by his own leader. By contrasting the quiet dignity of Agricola with the raw freedom of the Germans, Tacitus warns us that the greatest danger to a civilization isn't an enemy at the gates, but the loss of virtue within the walls. He tells us that the only real defense against tyranny is the individual's commitment to integrity, even when that integrity offers no reward other than a clear conscience.